and welcome back to J.P.s World of Wrestling. I am a man, J.P., and I have a little time on my hands. My wife's gone for a few hours, so here I am making a video. So I guess I'm going to take this time to talk about Wrestlemania 2. Wrestlemania 2, that's right. It's one of those events that just, for whatever reason, really resonated with me. I think it's because of the time period. This was a time, actually, this was when I was first introduced to wrestling this year, in 1986. It's a year that doesn't get talked about a lot from a WWF standpoint, and I don't know why, because I think it was pretty cool and exciting year in the WWF. But the story behind WrestleMania 2, for the main event anyway, Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy in a steel cage. Now, the thing about WrestleMania 2 that made it so unique was that it came from 3 simultaneous locations. There was location A, which was New York at the Nassau Coliseum. Then there was location B, which was Chicago at the Rosemont Horizon. And then there was location C, which was in the sports arena in Los Angeles. So, at this event, Ray Charles, they brought him in to sing America the Beautiful. And then they brought in an actress to do commentary with Vince McMahon. It was Susan St. James, who was a big deal at the time. She was on a very popular television show called Kate and Allie. And they brought her in to do commentary. She happened to be a wrestling fan, and she did commentary with Vince. So, this was a very interesting event because it was held at 3 simultaneous locations. Like, they started out in New York, where they would show the first 4 matches, and then they would show the second 4 matches in Chicago, and then they would show the last 4 matches in Los Angeles. So what would happen was, the audience in Chicago and Los Angeles, they would be in an arena, and they would watch the first 4 matches on a big screen. As soon as those matches were over, the Chicago audience got to watch the live matches, the next 4 matches, and then the other 2 arenas watched it from a big screen. So it was really interesting from a production standpoint. It must have been like a huge, huge undertaking because, man, broadcasting from 3 locations, you have to have 3 different crews. It's like, I don't know enough about television production to really understand what exactly the magnitude of what went into producing this event. But nevertheless, like, each location had sort of its own sort of main event. And the main event, well, before we get to that, like, there was an Intercontinental title match at WrestleMania 2. Macho Man would defend his Intercontinental title against George the Animal Steele, in which Macho Man was successful, but the story with this match is George the Animal Steele had been sort of harassing Elizabeth, but not really like harassing. He was like interested in Elizabeth, and Macho Man was getting jealous, and so it led to the match at WrestleMania 2. But Macho Man was successful. He pinned George the Animal. Of course, that led to the next year's match against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, but we're not there yet. So then, sort of the main event at the first portion of WrestleMania 2 was a boxing match. Roddy Piper and Mr. T. Piper was still not happy about Mr. T being in the WWF, so he challenged him to a boxing match. And Mr. T had appeared on the Piper's Pit, and they had an exchange of words and whatever. And so Piper said, I don't think you're so tough. I think I could outbox you. Mr. T's like, I'd like to see you try that. So, boxing match at WrestleMania 2. And Mr. T won, but it was by disqualification because Roddy Piper picked him up and body slammed him. You can't do that in boxing, so he was disqualified. Anyway, so then there came the Chicago portion of WrestleMania 2, which I believe had Gorilla Monsoon and Mean Gene Okerlund on commentary. And so, they had a women's title match, which I didn't care about. And then they had a battle royal, which was actually very cool, featuring a number of WWF wrestlers at the time, including Andre the Giant, and the Hart Foundation, Ted Arcidi, a bunch of guys, Ken Patera, a bunch of guys that were popular at the time of the WWF. But they also brought in a bunch of NFL superstars, and that was the year that the Chicago Bears had won the Super Bowl. So a bunch of the Chicago Bears was in this battle royal, and they had two football legends as the guest referees in the match. But basically, their only job really was to declare a winner, which happened to be Andre the Giant, who eliminated both members of the Hart Foundation, one after the other. And so he ended up winning. But the main event of the Chicago portion of WrestleMania 2 was a tag team title match. That's right, the Dream Team. Greg the Hammer Valentine and Brutus Beefcake put their titles on the line against the British Bulldogs. Now, the British Bulldogs at the time were managed by Captain Lou Albano, and they had Ozzy Osbourne with them at this particular event, standing with them in support at ringside. Well, Bulldogs were able to pull it off. They became tag team champions. Pretty cool. And so that leads us to, and also at that particular portion, there was a flag match. It was like the one and only time I'd ever seen Corporal Kirshner wrestle, but he wrestled this guy in a flag match in which the winner got to wave the flag. So Corporal Kirshner won, got to wave the United States flag. But this guy was also in a match. I believe he was in the Battle Royal. Obviously, he did not win. And this guy here, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, was in a match against Don Morocco in New York, the New York portion. And then, of course, this guy, we'll get to this guy in a minute. So that would bring us to the Los Angeles portion of WrestleMania 2, where the commentary team, I believe, was Jesse the Body Ventura, Old Alfred Hayes, and Elvira, who was like a horror movie woman. She was in a bunch of horror movies. She was really popular in the 80s with the whole horror movie genre. And so she did guest commentary with those guys. And, there was a tag match with the Funk Brothers and JYD and Tito Santana. And Adrian Adonis was there. And, but then there would be the main event, the big match. Steel cage match, WWF title, where this guy, Hulk Hogan, would take on King Kong Bundy. My goodness, King Kong Bundy was a monster. And at a Saturday night main event, Hulk Hogan was wrestling Don Morocco. And King Kong Bundy had attacked him from behind and squashed him, crushed his ribs. So therefore, Hulk, said, hey, man, you want me? You can have me at WrestleMania in a steel cage. So they constructed this special steel cage. It was the big blue steel cage that I grew to know and love in the 80s and throughout the 90s that they kept. But it was primarily built for this one event because King Kong Bundy was so huge that he couldn't climb up the fence normally. So they made this big blue steel cage so that Bundy could potentially climb up it. But Hogan left Bundy in a pool of his own blood. His face was a crimson mass of blood. And Hogan escaped the cage to retain the title. And I don't know. I really loved WrestleMania 2. And I think it was because that year, it's a year that not a lot of people talk about, but it's a year where these guys, these LJN figures, were the hot commodity. They were a popular item in the WWF. Kids my age really loved them, and they sold really well. And it was also at the height of Hulkamania. Hulkamania was still running wild at this point, and people were still very, very much on board with Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania. And to me, it was just a great time in the wrestling world. It was a great time to be a wrestling fan. And this was before I even knew about the NWA. I didn't know what was going on there. I didn't know what was going on with Portland wrestling where I was growing up. All I knew was the WWF. And although I didn't watch WrestleMania 2 live, years later when I saw it on video, I'm like, wow, man, this was awesome. This was great. I just the way they filmed it and the celebrities that they had that were involved with it, it was just very cool. It was very cool to watch the 3 different locations, how they pulled it off. Man, those were the days. Those were the days. WrestleMania 2, one of my favorite WrestleManias of all time. And it's just because that was my first year, my initial fandom year for being a WWF wrestling fan. And that year holds some very, very, very fond memories for myself. And so, with that, what are your thoughts on WrestleMania 2? Leave them in the comments below. That's going to do it for this video. So if you're new, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next time.